In this lecture, we will explore the wisdom composition that spans Proverbs 3, the entire chapter, starting with verse 1 and continuing through verse 35. The title I'd suggest for this is Wisdom Regarding Relationships. Wisdom Regarding Relationships. To begin with, let's set the scene by considering the position of this poem, that is the whole chapter's lecture, within the larger context of the book of Proverbs. Through the first two chapters of Proverbs, the sage has developed a case for wisdom, following a prologue that set forth the book's aims, the book's literary tools, and paradigmatic samples. And here we have in mind the first 9 verses of chapter 1. After that, then the sage proceeded to introduce two parties who were competing for the youth's devotion. Will he align with the violent gang drawn by its promise of wealth? And that's in chapter 1, verses 10 through 19. Or will he become one of Lady Wisdom's hearers, choosing a storm-proof life by adhering to her counsel? And that appeal is found in chapter 1, verses 20 through the end of chapter 1, that is verse 33. Assuming that the youth has chosen in favor of wisdom, in Proverbs 2, the sage proceeds to map out the extent of initiative the youth must display if he is truly serious about following Lady Wisdom and gaining the protection she has to offer. Throughout the opening 2 chapters, we encounter precious few actual instructions, and by instructions we're using that in a formal sense of having a command form of a verb, an imperative, adjussive, or a cohortative. Those commands that do appear in chapters 1 and 2 serve to endorse wisdom generally rather than prescribing conduct that would be particular to certain scenarios in life. The extensive wisdom commendation that spans Proverbs 1 and 2 serves only to cultivate the reader's anticipation for any instructions which may eventually arise. And arise they do. For the sage has compressed no less than 15 command forms within merely the first 12 verses once we get to Proverbs 3. So it is in Proverbs 3 that the sage's first actual lessons commence. Topping his list of lecture topics is this: wisdom regarding relationships. After Proverbs 3, a new block of teaching will begin, spanning Proverbs 4 through 9. It will feature a different voice, that of the sage's father. Proverbs 4 to 9 will follow a carefully organized scheme, ending in the confrontation found in Proverbs 9, where the youth must decide whom he will follow. In view of the unified nature of Proverbs 4 through 9, Proverbs 3 stands out all the more clearly as a conclusion that completes Proverbs 1 and 2, that is, following the extended wisdom commendation of Proverbs 1 and 2. The sophistication of composition found in Proverbs 3 reveals that it brings to a rich climax these opening 3 chapters. Let us now read through this chapter. Again, we'll follow with the translation that I have worked on, provided there in the left column. Verse 1 of chapter 3 in Proverbs. My son, my instruction you must not forget, and may your mind preserve my commandments. For longevity, years of life, and peace will they add to you. Loyal love and faithfulness must not abandon you. Tie them about your neck, write them on the tablet of your mind. Further, find favor and understanding concerning what is genuinely good in the esteem of God and mortals. Direct your confidence toward the Lord with your entire mind, and toward your own insight do not tend to support yourself. In all your ways know Him, and He personally will straighten your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Revere the Lord and veer away from evil. May healing come to the core of your being and drink to your bones. Honor the Lord out of your substance, even from the earliest of all your revenue, so that your storehouses may be filled with plenty, and new wine may burst your vats. Do not refuse the Lord's discipline, my son, and do not respond to his reprimand with disgust. For it is the one he loves that the Lord reprimands, just as would a father a son of whom he is particularly proud. How fortunate a mortal who has found wisdom, and a mortal who keeps on obtaining insight. For her market value exceeds the market value of silver, and her revenue exceeds gold filigree. More precious is she than coral pearls, and none of your delights can compare with her. Longevity is in her right hand, and in her left are wealth and glory. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her footpaths are peace. A tree of life is she to those who grasp hold of her, and those who attain her are each declared fortunate. The Lord himself, by wisdom, founded the earth, establishing the skies through insight. By his knowledge the depths were split apart, and clouds may yet overflow with rain. My son, they must not disappear from your field of vision. Preserve success and forethought, so that they may become life for your inner being and favor about your neck. Then you will travel with confidence along your way, and your foot will not trip. Whenever you lie down, you will not feel panic. So you will lie down, and delicious will be your sleep. Do not fear either sudden panic or the destruction of the guilty. Surely it will come. For the Lord will be at your side, and so will protect your foot from capture. Do not refuse good from those deserving it, when it is in your power to do so. Do not say to your neighbors, "Be gone and come back, tomorrow I will give," although you have it with you. Do not scheme evil against your neighbor, although he dwells with you in confidence. Do not level baseless charges against a mortal if he has not worked evil against you. Do not envy a person characterized by violence, nor choose any of his ways. For a crook is abhorrent to the Lord, but he confides in honest folk. The Lord's curse is on a guilty person's household, but even the settlement of moral folk will he bless. As surely as he personally scoffs at the scoffers, so to humble folk he will give favor. Glory is what wise folk will inherit, while stupid folk go on boasting about ignominy. Proverbs 3 consists of a single poem in 4 sections. Section 1 opens with a wisdom summons quatrain, that is, 2 verses for a total of 4 hemistiches. Then it proceeds to posit focal imperatives that are requisite for healthy relationships. That's section 1. It runs from verse 1 through 4. These relationships operate on 2 specific axes, the divine-human axis and human-to-human axis. We find that in the last half of verse 4. Section 2 takes up the first of those 2 axes, that is, the divine-human dimension. This will span verses 5 through 12. Among a total of 9 command forms found there, 3 are evenly metered in block 2a. Those 3 are relying on the Lord, verse 5, revering the Lord, in verse 7, and honoring the Lord, in verse 9. Before taking up the human-to-human axis in section 4, the sage presents a wisdom commendation in section 3 that spans verses 13 to 26, just as he preceded the divine human instructions of section 2 with a wisdom commendation in section 1. The wisdom commendation in section 3 creates a unique segue leading to section 4. Section 4, for its part, spans verses 27 to 35. In that final section, the sage completes his teaching concerning healthy relationships by addressing now the human-to-human connections. In sum, the lecture spanning Proverbs 3 cycles twice through sections that are characterized in turn by a wisdom commendation that paves the way for wisdom content concerning the vertical and the horizontal axes of relationships. Let's give our attention now to macrostructural features. There are 4 features that give unity to the lecture spanning Proverbs 3 at their macrostructural level, that is, involving multiple sections. They include the following. First, a dual theme introduction in section 1 that will connect with sections 2, 3, and 4. Second, echoes of sections 1 and 2 that are evident in section 3. Third, chiastic links between sections 2 and 4. And finally, progression of thought from section 3 to section 4. Let's begin then by exploring the dual theme introduction found in section 1, which connects to sections 2, 3, and 4. The grand relational instructions of section 1 conclude by directing the youth to invest his efforts in 2 tiers. The 2 parts of verse 4b indicate that he must attend to his relationship with the divine without overlooking the importance of human-to-human relationships. 4b reads, "in the esteem of God and mortals." The first of these tiers, the relationship with the divine, the sage then addresses by means of no less than 9 command forms, which begin fairly directly in section 2. Verses 5 through 12 comprises section 2. The term mortal, found in verse 4b, designates the second tier. After the dual theme introduction in section 1, this term mortal next appears twice in one verse as subject of each hemistich, and that's found in the opening verse of section 3, verse 13. Mortal is not a common term within Proverbs 3, occurring again only in verse 30. Within the verbally frugal style of wisdom sayings, the simple technique of squandering 2 words on the same lexeme within a single verse can signal a degree of emphasis. We find this especially true in the master lecture that spans Proverbs 25 through 29. Thus, the watchful pupil might expect that the double usage in verse 13 signals the onset of teaching about human-to-human relationships. Such an inference is correct, in part. The double reference to mortals does signal the teachings concerning human-to-human relationships, and that will specifically begin in section 4, which spans verses 27 to 35. But that human-to-human relationship teaching will take place only after the sage has paved the way with the wisdom commendation right here in section 3, that is, verses 13 to 26. This 2-part sequence resembles the manner in which the wisdom commendation of section 1 preceded the sage's teachings about divine-human relationships in section 2. The next macrostructure we'd like to consider involves echoes of sections 1 and 2 that we discover when we come to section 3. 6 elements of section 3, most especially those located within 3b, that is verses 21 to 26, echo elements that appeared earlier in sections 1 and 2. First, notice the vocative that opens both section 1 and in section 3, block B, that is verse 21. Here you see 21, which reads, "My son, they must not disappear from your field of vision." Vocative "my son" opened the entire lecture also in verse 1. So that constitutes a link between section 3 echoing section 1. Second, observe the similarity of sentiments that appear in the following 2 verses. Verse 1, "You must not forget, and may your mind preserve." And then from 21, "They must not disappear from your field of vision," which is similar to saying, "You must not forget." And 21 commands preserve. Now, this verb to preserve does not appear in anywhere else in chapter 3, aside from verse 1 and 21. Second, involves the term neck, referring to a place where one might suspend something of value, a pendant, a necklace. The term neck appears in section 1, verse 3, and then again here in section 3, verse 22. Within Proverbs 3, this term appears only on these two occasions. Fourth involves the two terms life and favor. We first encountered them in section 1 in verses 2 and 4, respectively. Now they reappear here in block 3b within a single verse and in the same sequence as they appeared, with life first and then favor second. It appears in verse 22, which reads, "So that they," that is, success and forethought, "may become life for your inner being and favor about your neck." We should naturally inquire, are these terms common within chapter 3, or does this mark fairly unique usage? The answer is that elsewhere in chapter 3, the term life does appear one other time, but only one other time. It is in verse 18 in the expression tree of life. How about favor? Favor similarly appears only one other time. It will be in verse 34, and that is towards the end of the poem, where it thickens the sense of closure as the lecture is moving towards its final verses. Thus, the relative infrequency of the terms life and favor within this chapter increases the likelihood that when they both appear together in block 3b, there in verse 22, the sage intended that they should remind us of content already presented back in section 1. Fifth, compare the section 2 combination of confidence plus revere or fear. Those are in verses 5 and 7, respectively. And then when we reach section 3, the combination of confidence plus fear. In section 3, that appears in verses 23 and 25. So in 23, we read, "Then you will travel with confidence along your way, and your foot will not trip." And in 25, we read, "Do not fear either sudden panic," and so forth. Other than the additional use of the term confidence in verse 29, those terms, confidence and fear or revere, do not appear elsewhere in Proverbs 3, thereby increasing the likelihood that the sage intended the reader to recall themes from section 2 when he encountered them in block 3b. Sixth, the verse pairs that close block 3a and 3b each underscore the fact that absent the Lord, wisdom and its ensuing protection would be unthinkable. Block 3a closes with these two verses, 19 and 20. Notice how mission critical is the presence of the Lord when it comes to wisdom. And then verses 25 and 26 close out block 3b, and once again the sage lifts up the absolute essential nature of the Lord's involvement when it comes to safety benefits which a wise person enjoys. In view of the concentrated teaching about the divine-human relationship that just concluded in section 2, now with these echoes in section 3, the sage shows that it is relational health in the vertical axis which will usher in the immensely desirable prize of acquiring wisdom with all of its derivative benefits, such as safety. Through these 6 echoes, it becomes evident that in section 3, particularly section 3, block B, that is verses 21 through 26, the sage has in mind section 1. 2 implications arise from that close connection. First, notice the pronoun they in verse 21. "My son, they must not disappear from your field of vision." This raises the question, what is he referring to with the pronoun they? The antecedent of they in this expression, "they must not disappear," would refer to wisdom in general. This is in part indicated by the last half of the verse, which showcases success and forethought, which are related to the general notion of wisdom. but even more so by beginning with the pronoun instead of articulating what is the commodity he's referring to. It's as if the sage is saying, I hope you remember what we were talking about before. They must not disappear. What was he talking about before? As we roll back to the lecture's beginning in verse 1, we know that he's referring to wisdom. Not only that, in verses 3 and 4, he presented universal instructions about relationships. That is, instructions that would apply both to relationships in the divine category, the vertical axis, as well as in the human, the horizontal axis. And those universal instructions involved loyal love and faithfulness, endorsing the theory that the pronoun they looks all the way back to those first 4 verses of the chapter. Endorsing that is the realization that the prohibition we find in 21, namely, they must not disappear, is calculated to recall 2 parallel prohibitions that were there in section 1. You must not forget, that's verse 1, and they must not abandon you, verse 3. Those run on the same rails semantically as they must not disappear in verse 21. So the first takeaway is clarity regarding the antecedent of that pronoun they. It refers back to wisdom, and particularly in section 1. Second, through these 6 echoes, we discover this. As the aim of section 3 sharpens to a point in block 3b, remember that vocative that begins 21? My son, they must not disappear. This is an intensification. Here, through the echoes, we realize the sage is recalling those universal relationship principles of section 1 as if to say, I was deeply serious about what I taught you in section 1. That was not just a throwaway introduction. That was absolutely foundational. Those things must not disappear from your field of vision, verse 21. Above all, you must hold to wisdom tenaciously, and more than anything else, how you treat others will show whether you truly have a grip on wisdom. Namely, and here are those universal principles, whether you love them loyally, and secondly, whether you remain steadfastly dependable. In the next video, we'll proceed to the remaining 2 macrostructural features.